By late November 1942, the battle for Stalingrad had reached a breaking point. While German forces remained deeply engaged in urban combat inside the ruins of the city, Soviet command had completed preparations for a large-scale counter-offensive. The German army's focus on capturing Stalingrad had left its flanks weak and poorly defended, especially in the open steppe regions north and south of the city. These positions were held primarily by Allied Axis forces, including Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian units, who lacked the equipment and defensive strength needed to resist a major armored assault. On November 19, 1942, the Soviet counteroffensive began. Operation Uranus was launched with overwhelming force. Massive artillery bombardments were followed by coordinated tank and infantry attacks against the German flanks. Soviet armored units broke through defensive lines rapidly, advancing through weakly held positions and overwhelming Axis forces. The speed and scale of the assault shocked German command. Within days, Soviet forces had penetrated deep behind German lines. By November 23, Soviet armored units linked up near the town of Kalach-on-Don. This maneuver completed the encirclement of the German 6th Army and parts of the 4th Panzer Army inside Stalingrad. More than 250,000 Axis soldiers were now trapped inside the city and its surrounding ruins. Supply routes were cut. Escape routes were closed. The German forces were completely surrounded. German command faced a critical decision. Field commanders requested permission to break out of the encirclement while there was still a chance. However, Adolf Hitler refused to authorize a retreat. He issued direct orders that Stalingrad must be held at all costs. The German army was instructed to remain in position and wait for relief forces that would attempt to break the encirclement from the outside. This decision sealed the fate of the trapped army. German leadership promised that the surrounded forces would be supplied by air. The Luftwaffe attempted to deliver food, ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies by aircraft. In reality, the airlift was completely inadequate. Weather conditions, Soviet air defenses, and limited transport capacity made large-scale resupply impossible. Only a fraction of the required supplies reached the encircled troops. Inside the pocket, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Food shortages became extreme. Soldiers survived on starvation rations that provided only a fraction of daily nutritional needs. Horses were slaughtered for meat. In some areas, soldiers consumed leather, belts, and equipment materials in desperate attempts to survive. Malnutrition weakened immune systems and accelerated the spread of disease. Medical care collapsed. Hospitals were overcrowded, understaffed, and undersupplied. Wounded soldiers were left untreated. Many died from infections, exposure, or untreated injuries rather than combat wounds. Medical staff were overwhelmed and exhausted, unable to manage the scale of suffering. Fuel shortages made heating impossible. Soldiers lived in freezing conditions inside destroyed buildings and makeshift shelters. Frostbite became widespread. Entire units lost combat effectiveness due to cold-related injuries. Weapons froze and malfunctioned. Vehicles became unusable. The winter environment turned survival into a daily struggle. Psychological collapse followed physical collapse. Morale disintegrated. Many soldiers lost the will to fight. Discipline weakened. Desertions increased. Some soldiers surrendered voluntarily to Soviet forces simply to escape starvation and freezing. The belief in rescue faded as days passed without relief. Outside the encirclement, German relief operations failed. Attempts to break through Soviet lines were repelled. Soviet defenses were well organized and heavily reinforced. The Red Army maintained pressure on the encircled forces while tightening the ring around them. By January 1943, the German position inside Stalingrad was unsustainable. The encircled army had been split into smaller pockets. Communication between units broke down. Command structures collapsed. Organized resistance weakened. Soldiers were physically incapable of sustained combat. On January 31, 1943, the southern group of the German 6th Army surrendered. 2 days later, on February 2, 1943, the remaining northern group also surrendered. The Battle of Stalingrad officially ended. Approximately 90,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner. Only a small fraction would ever return home. The rest died in captivity due to disease, starvation, and harsh conditions. The scale of destruction was unprecedented. Stalingrad was almost completely destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians had died. Entire neighborhoods had been erased. The city was reduced to ruins. Strategically, the defeat at Stalingrad marked a turning point in the Second World War. It was the first complete destruction of a German field army. The myth of German military invincibility was shattered. Momentum on the Eastern Front shifted decisively in favor of the Soviet Union. From this point forward, German forces would be pushed steadily westward. Politically and psychologically, the impact was immense. Allied nations gained confidence. Axis morale collapsed. The balance of power in Europe began to change. However, the true legacy of Stalingrad was not only strategic, it was human. The battle demonstrated the extreme limits of human endurance. It revealed the cost of ideological war fought without restraint. It showed how cities could become graveyards and how soldiers could become victims of decisions made far from the battlefield. Stalingrad became a symbol not only of military defeat, but of human suffering on an unimaginable scale. The city was rebuilt after the war, but the memory of the battle remains embedded in history as one of the darkest chapters of human conflict. The ruins were cleared, the buildings were reconstructed, but the ground itself remained a mass grave. The Battle of Stalingrad stands as a warning about what happens when power, ambition, and ideology override humanity. It is remembered not only as a military turning point, but as a testament to the cost of war when human life becomes secondary to victory.